Good morning. I'll just enlarge the screen in the room for those in here, and you can all see, so that's good. So welcome to this month's free demo where I'm using gouache. The paper I'm using is called Paint On by Claire Fontaine. It's a mixed media paper, so it's quite thick card, and this is the verdigris pad. That's what it looks like. So it's 250 GSM. You get 30 sheets, so it's a grey green. They do morning Wendy, morning Mandy. Very cold and dull Sheffield, I bet. But this is really good, and what's nice about mixed media papers or multimedia techniques, it tells you what you can use. So I think that's pastels, pencils, thick paint and pen. So I've used this for gouache and pastels and all sorts. It isn't, morning Sharon, it isn't overly textured, but it is really nice. They do a green grey, a denim colour, which is a blue grey. They do black, grey and natural, which is sort of a beigey biscuit colour. And they also do a mixed pad of all of them, apart from the green. The green is missing in the mixed pad, mainly because it came out afterwards. Now, for those on YouTube, I've been able to drop the link in of the online shop for the Paint On pad. So if you go onto YouTube to watch the video, you'll be able to see the comments, the link if you wanted to buy a Paint On pad. Oh, the one that I shared on Facebook. It's lovely, those acoustics. I need to find somewhere. And I'm using gouache. I'm using Winsor & Newton gouache, and it's the designer's gouache I use. I do prefer those, but they are really expensive now. They're between £8 and £12 a tube. They do last a long time. And all I've done is I've squeezed my tubes out into empty watercolour pans, just because I use gouache a lot. It's so much easier than keeping them on a tile. I was saying to Jane in the room earlier, I used to squeeze them on a tile and then keep them because you can reuse them, but as they dry they shrink and then they'd fall off my tile. So this is a way of keeping them all together. I do find I do need an extra squeeze of white because it's more opaque. So gouache, I will talk to you what gouache is. It's been around 500-600 years, believe it or not, and it used to be called body colour, and it was only available as white. And artists like Sir Nicholas Hilliard, who was Queen Elizabeth I's portrait painter, he did watercolours on vellum, but he used body colour or white gouache to add bulk to watercolours. So there are two ways you can go. It's basically watercolour, coloured gouache is watercolour pigment, but with the addition of a sort of chalk added to it to make it opaque and to make it sort of dry in that sort of very matte way, a bit like emulsion dries. So the thing to remember is it is water based, it is opaque, so it's almost like an in-between of acrylics and watercolour. You can use it like a watercolour if you wanted to, but you can build up your lights on top of your darks, which you can't in watercolour. You have to work from light to dark in watercolour. In gouache you can work any way. And what's good about gouache being opaque and water based, sounds like acrylics, however when gouache dries you can reconstitute it with water. When acrylic dries you can't. So if you're after a starter set, I'm just going to pop in the link on YouTube for the starter set of gouache, which is about £7.50 for 12 tubes. Obviously it's not as opaque as the high quality Winsor & Newton ones, but that doesn't mean that they're not good, and it's a really good way to start. So there are two ways you can start in gouache if you're not sure. Oh, thank you, Sharon. You like this paper. for gouache because you got it from me. Excellent. That's good. I love using this. So if you've got watercolours already and you think you might like gouache, use white gouache, buy a tube of white gouache and mix it with your watercolours to make your other colours opaque, which is what the pre-Raphaelites did. Or morning, Lynette, am I? I might be. I don't know. My camera's being a bit naughty today. I think I'm in focus. Good morning, Judith. From Mould, Rithwig, is that right, isn't it? My ex-wife was born in Mould, and it's her birthday today, so happy birthday. So I've used the green grey, and I've got my little lamp here. In terms of colours, I will be using black and white, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, ultramarine and lemon yellow, but that's maybe for just for the grass. I'm not going to do anything for the background. I've got 40 minutes left now because I've been chatting to you for 5 minutes, and then we'll do the grass in the front just to make a little scene out of it. I'm using the ProArty miniature painting brushes mainly because they're amazing. There we go. I'm using a number 2 and I think that was a 1/8 flat. What I like about these is that it's hexagonal, you know, so really good grip. And what's this one? This one is a 0 Proline rigger brush, and this was in a set of brushes, the Pebeo brushes, but I've deliberately got this one because it's manky. It's old and it's bitty and it's got all sorts of jaggedy edges. Oh, I've got someone in the shop, so let me find my little piece of card that tells people that I'm not abandoning you, and I'll be back in a second. Won't be long. Right, I'm back. Right, I'll do some painting now. It was just an inquiry, unfortunately. But never mind, he is going to come back. So I don't want to use too much water. I've got a bit of white. I'm going to do the darker tones of the lamb's fleece with a bit of yellow ochre, white, and maybe a little bit of burnt sienna, but not much. And then I'm just going to fill it in. Now, the thing to remember with gouache is it dries flat and matte. So if you think about when you emulsion things on the wall, the colour that you put on isn't the colour that the wall goes, is it? It goes a little bit darker. Gouache is exactly the same. So you'll watch as this dries that the gouache goes darker. I've got to do his face, but I just want to block it in. You'll see how the colour at the top is going darker as it's drying out. So it's a little bit opposite to watercolour painting, in that watercolours you have to allow drying lighter. In gouache you have to allow it to dry darker. I'll probably go a little bit darker still in a minute, but I just want to block it in, because giving myself the challenge of doing paintings in 45 minutes is all fun and games until you actually have to do the thing. I'm going to leave that there. Let me go in with the round brush just to do a bit of detail. I don't want it overly runny. But again, as usual with any paint, if you want detail, it has to be more dilute, because otherwise you won't get a decent edge. Right, so that is a basic colour. As it dries, it will go. There's one colour I've missed off, which is crimson, because it literally is only for the inside of his ears. So I'll do crimson and white to make pink. I do love gouache. It works just so nicely. Some people don't get on with it because they're treating it either like a watercolour or an acrylic, and it isn't either of them. It has to be treated for its own strengths. You can see it's a lot darker, isn't it? That bit. It's very biscuit coloured. I'm going to make a slightly darker tone from ultramarine and burnt sienna. You could use Payne's grey, but I'm old school, and I could use black if I wanted to as well, but I just want to keep it less harsh and use the black just for the eyes, nose and mouth. So a mix of ultramarine and burnt sienna. I've had a new student in the oil classes recently, and he's just discovered my mix of ultramarine and burnt sienna, and he's obsessed with it because it's just so useful, because you can make an almost black with it and many shades of browns. Yeah, it's a lovely colour mix. Good for shadows as well. Oh, I've got other people in the shop now. That's good. It's good for me, but it does stress me out abandoning you all. So that leg's a bit darker. The benefit of gouache versus acrylic, morning Naomi, is that I could either keep that quite subtle, quite solid line, or with a clean damp brush, I can just soften the edges with water and then blend it in. Whereas with acrylics, when it's dry, it's dry. With gouache, when it's dry, you can still manipulate it, even weeks or months after, just like with watercolours. It really does, and that's where I think it's just perfect in a way that you can correct and you can change and you can alter. So I'm going to make the darker tones a little bit more of them. See, that's quite runny. I don't really want it that runny. So anybody, if you've got any questions, do please. So this is why I'm using this really old manky brush, because it naturally forms little peaks. So I can do a large area in one go. It's not going to stay this colour, but I need to build up his fluffiness. It's amazing how quickly it builds up, doesn't it? I'll work on his little face in a minute, but which isn't as fluffy. So I'll mix a bit of that colour with the initial fleece colour, just for the top of his head. Just remember that it will go darker than the colour you put on. See what that looks like as that dries. So you don't want to delete all of the colours that you've got on there and get rid of them, and you want to keep them, but because we can build up, it works really well. So I'm going to just stop for a second and let it dry, have a drink of my coffee. Oh, you know my problem, Rosemary, I've always got spelling mistakes on the website. I'll go and check that one out later. I've made many a faux pas with spelling mistakes. Some that I can't repeat live on Facebook. And yes, I gave a mail shot out to all of our customers in the first month that we opened, and I got the words, the letters in discount the wrong way round, and it spelt a very rude word, and I didn't notice until after 300 people got the email. So that was rather embarrassing. Right, and they're going with a little bit of... It's amazing. So that's it's not a downside to gouache, but it is something that you do have to be aware of, that it will darken considerably to what you've put on there. So I'm just going to do his eyes in black.
So you've got to experiment beforehand, really.
Yes, to see how it changes, because it really is quite different, and I can see why people do feel apprehensive about it because of this change in colour. So we've just got that on there for his eyes. I'm just going to shade that line into his pink ears a little. Rosemary, I know you've done gouache before, haven't you? And acrylics. So it's interesting, I think, to see the differences in these things. So what I like is the fact that I can keep blending. Obviously, if you go too dark, throw your brush across the room, the darks do change quite drastically. I'm going to have to go and serve So I'll be back in a second, but that gives that a good chance to dry. Backing him in. I'm back. That was a nice quick sale. Right. Whew. So I'm just looking at the reference image just to see where the slightly darker areas are around his face. There's a little bit under his chin. But what I do like is the fact that I have got a lot of control. I might stick a little bit of black in to make it a bit darker. I've got a lot of control over the blending. See, I can go really dark and fade it out. But again, the bonus is I can tweak it, add more lights if it ends up too dark.
That's an important thing, really.
Absolutely. I mean, in watercolours it's tricky because you've got to go from light to dark, so it's hard to guess how dark it is, whereas with gouache it's almost the opposite way round. So I can very much see why the Pre-Raphaelites used it in their methods.
I think it's easier going that way round, isn't it? From dark to light.
For me, it makes far more sense to go from dark to light, and it's a bit more control. I like to have the control when I'm working. I know some people love watercolours because of the lack of control. Not me. Right, let's that dry. Very quiet online today. So he's building himself up a little bit. You can see he's starting to look a bit more 3D. Then we've got the highlights to put on. I taught an oil painting class last night, and we were doing a big metallic silver picture, which was really tricky to do. Everybody did a really good job. They were moaning all the way through, but that's okay because that's how we process the way of working.
Was that famous painting of Klimt, wasn't there, in gold?
Oh yes, and I think he used actual gold for that. With this oil, it is making it look metallic. It's still wet, but I can show you on the camera. This is my 2-hour demonstration piece, but you know, it's really quite fun to do metallics, but it's still really wet. But it's good practice. For some people, they now know that they never want to paint metallic objects again, but at least you know, don't you? Yeah, Rosemary, I'm with you with that, with watercolour. I mean, I've been working in watercolours for decades, and I still struggle with the light to dark aspects of it. So I don't want hardly any yellow ochre in, but I want it just an off-white. So if I just nudge that sort of creamy colour that we used before. And I'm going to splay the bristles on this brush just a little bit. Wipe off the ferrule of water because it always gives a blob, which is quite frustrating.
It's the same when you're painting a room.
Yes.
I did that recently, but I found there was a slight small hole at the bottom of the tin.
Oh no! Did it leak? Did it leak everywhere?
Just a bit. Fortunately, I realised something was the matter.
Oh, good grief! That'd be awful. So I'm being very light because the light's coming from. I think it is coming from the right. But we can't have a spring demo without a little lamb on there.
Yes, the fields will soon be full of them.
They will, won't they? It's that season of the little lamb. So I will be using the bigger brush to do the same effect on its fleece. White. And what I find with gouache, you really only need... Hello Diane, good morning. You can always watch it back. It will be available on our YouTube channel forever and on Facebook as long as Facebook exists. And I aim to get it on our free stuff page on our website by the end of the day. But they've changed how they do their YouTube links at the moment, so I can't share them on the website like I used to straight away. So I'm being a bit more delicate where it's slightly darker, and I can go much stronger where it's lighter. I'm trying to follow the sort of, I'm going to call it a stripe, but it's not quite a stripe, but you can see where the fleece changes, the wool changes in sort of linear fashion. So I'm still not using pure white, I'm just using white with a bit of cream. But he's building up nicely, isn't he? And then I'll go into more white.
It's rather like those books with magic painting, you know.
Yes. I'll go over the outline of the drawing to make it feel woollier. So this is almost neat white this time, to be able to just catch the brighter parts. Go back to the small brush. Maybe I won't be using the little flat brush now, or I could use it for laying in a bit of grass maybe, I don't know. So it goes, it's a little bit thicker and slightly more matted on the leg and knee. And it sort of comes more like fur rather than wool. So I'll do slightly longer strokes on his legs.
A few different textures on the...
Oh, it's actually quite amazing once you really look at it. The image of the lamb, by the way, is from the free image site Pixabay. So if you wanted to download it yourself to have a go, if you go, I just Google. I went on Pixabay and just typed in lamb, and I think this was on the first page. Pixabay, Pixabay, Pixabay. It's a wonderful resource for free references. You don't need an account, you can just download and go. It's a slightly darker version. How am I doing for time? Just down here. I know this is dark leg, but no, Pixabay is a really good site. There are several out there that work, and basically how it works is you've got photographers that upload the images and just give you permission to use them royalty free. And most of them you don't have to acknowledge or even mention the photographer or artist. So it is, and that's where Pixabay I think works really, really well. So if you're using a stock image for your work or your website, really good place to go. But you can see how economical gouache is. It's so opaque, you hardly need anything at all. But as with everything, the more water you add, the less opaque it's going to be, so just be careful with that. Build it up. Keep building up. That's the crucial thing. But I find it easier to build up by adding lights, and then if I add too many, I can go back in with the darks afterwards, and that's where it works really well. Whereas if you were doing this in watercolor, you'd have to start with your lightest and then gradually get darker, which a lot of people struggle with. You do, exactly, because you really want to feel that texture.
Yes. It's so easy to actually ruin something, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And it doesn't take more than a couple of brush strokes to do that too. People think you could, or if I spend another hour on it, I'll ruin it. Sometimes if you spend another minute on it, you'll ruin it.
Yes.
We did a portrait painting class in acrylics the other week, and it was amazing that with every brush stroke the face changed, sometimes for the positive, sometimes for the negative, but yeah, it's amazing how little a picture needs to totally change one way or the other. I might need to add a few more darks back in.
Yes, you could just with putting a line around the eye.
Absolutely, and then it can either work really well and look just like that person's eye, or it will just look like a comic illustration, and then it won't work. But when I'm doing pet portraits, this is how I build it up. But obviously, if I'm doing a big face of a dog, it could take me 12 hours, especially dogs with very long, like spaniel ears, long curly ears, take forever and a day to do, but they're lovely to do.
Have you had commissions for them?
Yes, yeah. I've got to do a beagle at some point soon, which is nice. I've done one beagle a few years ago. I like to find out a little bit more about the animal, their personality when I'm painting them. If I've not met them, I like to know what they're like. Yes, exactly. So if they're a little monkey, I can add an extra twinkle, which is usually the case with many dogs.
Yes, that's true.
I did a Chihuahua not so long ago, well, a few years ago, and I had to double check because I wanted to paint him as if he was Lord of the Manor. He had such an aloof look, and it turns out that's exactly what he was. He had a very idea that he should be the king.
Lovely.
But it's just lovely to. I find gouache very relaxing and rewarding in equal measure.
Yes, you can play around with it more.
You can, and literally, you really can just do the odd little line, the odd little bit here. I'm coming up to time, so I do want to add a bit of grass in the foreground just to set the scene. So I will use lemon yellow, which that is lemon yellow, but it's just really dirty, and green. I'll use lemon yellow and ultramarine. If I use lemon yellow and something like cerulean, I'd get a very punchy green, but it wouldn't be very natural. So I'll do slightly darker first, so with a bit more blue. And I can, so it is in a, there's a tussock here, so I'll have to put that in.
Oh, you haven't used your other brush?
No, I'm going to use the rigger brush shortly, and this is the 1/8 inch flat. So I'm using it now because I feel sorry for it because I haven't used it at all. So I'm getting this on with a little bit more water to move it around. A bit more blue in there, and we'll go under his feet. I'm going to do it as a vignette just so you can see what can be done with gouache. So if I fill it in a little bit more,
Oh, it's projecting.
absolutely, it just makes it so much more solid. Gouache has been used such a long time, and it's used a lot by designers and illustrators. So often, I think the Ladybird book illustrations would have been used in a mixture of watercolour and gouache. Because you can really get that softness if you want it, and you can make it quite dramatic and punchy as well. So I'm just going to use a little bit more water to fade out the base. I might have to use a little bit of black within that green just to darken it a little bit more.
Am I able to take a photograph afterwards?
Yeah, of course you can.
Oh, thank you.
Right, I'll let that dry for a little minute. The thing to remember with gouache as well is that you do need to really clean your brushes. That it's a heavier pigment. I just want to darken some of his ear. It's a heavier pigment than watercolour, so it will linger in your brushes a lot more. So because you might think you've given it a quick rinse like you would with watercolour, and you think, oh, well, that's fine, it's done. And then when you go to use it, it's still quite full. Oh, thank you, Sharon. I love this little lamp painting as well, so I want to do some longer tufts of grass, and that will give it more a sense of scale, but I do want that to dry before I go on there. But if I show you a little bit more closely, I'll show Facebook, so I'll move it down first so Facebook can see it closer, and then YouTube, you can see how it looks. Yeah, so it's a really good way of getting texture. Because if I did it in gouache, in watercolour, I would probably still have to use white gouache to give me some opacity to do some highlights. So it works perfectly. So I'm going to use the rigger brush now. with lemon yellow and a little bit of ultramarine. Again, if it's too runny, it won't be very opaque, but I might use a bit of white in there afterwards just to bring it up. You can see, because I've got it quite dilute, it's not sticking up and standing out massively, but it's good for texture. So what I'm going to do is I'll show you, this rigger brush is good for long grasses, but the brush, my manky brush as I call it, that I use for the fur, is also really good for short grasses. So this isn't a brush specifically designed for this. This is just a brush that has been used for acrylics, and it's splayed all of the bristles. So it's perfect for textures. Add a bit of white in there, a bit more yellow. So when you're doing stuff like this with a brush like this, what I'm doing is I'm twisting the brush each time I'm rolling it between my finger and thumb. And the reason for that is it will give you the grass in a different angle. Whereas if you just use it the same way all the time, it will begin to look like a potato print. So this way, a bit more white in there and maybe a bit more yellow. You can take a photo of the actual thing in a bit, Jane.
I was going to take one of your hand.
Of my hand doing it.
These cameras are rather funny things to have. And like a oracle or something like that.
Ah, yes. Okay, with a slightly darker green, with just a bit more blue in there. Give us some texture. So you do need the paint to be quite runny, but that's where it can get a little bit trickier. The runnier the paint, the less opacity you've got. We'll do a little tuft here. A bit more blue, a bit more yellow. So I do love gouache, and we do once a month on a Monday evening we have a gouache lesson. The second Monday each month is usually gouache, and we do various things. We used to do a weekly gouache class on a morning, but that wasn't as popular. But I think it was more to do with the fact that it was a morning, and people still aren't sure what gouache is, even though it's been around for ages. So I'll break this up a little bit just with a few more random tufts of varying tones around the foreground. There we go, that's quite sweet, isn't it? A little lamb. So next month I'm doing wax resist spring flowers in a landscape using watercolour, and that's going to be quite interesting. I'll be using normal children's wax crayons, so that'll be quite fun. So you can see how that works. So that's next month, the 1st of April, and it won't be a joke. The 1st of April is the next demo at 11 o'clock. I think you'd like gouache, Libby, because you can build it up. Even just white gouache works really well. just with, because I know you do watercolour, don't you, Libby? So yeah, I think you'd find that that works really well in conjunction with watercolour. The other positive is you can use gel pen with it. So if I wanted just to add a little highlight in the lamb's eyes, I can use a gel pen on top. So it works really well. So thank you very much for your company. Thank you, Mandy. If you do, I'll take a photograph of this and put it in the Facebook on the shops page so you can see what it looks like. But if you do have a go, I really would love to see. So thank you very much. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you. A lovely demonstration.
Oh, thank you.